Hi there, welcome back to Real Film Chronicles. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
So this is Recent Reels Volume 2. In this episode, we're going to review several movies that we've watched recently that made an impression for various reasons. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
Yeah, did you want to talk first on any recent movies that sort of hit a chord with you?
I think maybe you should lead us off because you got me to watch this film or rewatch this film again. A little film called Total Recall.
Total Recall, the remake from 2012. I'm glad you brought this up. I have been dying to talk about this since I watched it a few weeks ago, and I'm glad that you got to watch it recently as well. This is the remake of the fantastic Arnold Schwarzenegger, Paul Verhoeven film based on the Philip K. Dick novel.
We can remember it for you wholesale.
Fantastic. Thank you. So this iteration of Total Recall is directed by Len Wiseman and stars Colin Farrell, Kate Beckinsale, and Jessica Biel, amongst others, including Bryan Cranston and Bill Nighy. Do you remember seeing this in theaters?
I don't believe that I saw it in theaters. However,
yeah.
So I bought it several years after the fact, I believe. It was in like the $5, $8 bin, and I picked it up because I wanted to see it, and it was essentially the cost of admission. But I did not see it in theater. I wasn't rushing out to see this. As like Total Recall, the original, is one of my favorite films of all time. It's one of my favorite Verhoeven films. It's just all around. It's one of my comfort films. If I'm feeling down or I'm feeling low, I can throw Total Recall up on the screen and instantly I just feel better. My life is just my life is better watching this movie. So
without a doubt,
for me, I might be a little bit more emotionally invested in the original than you. It was with RoboCop. So the Total Recall RoboCop double feature was actually the first R-rated movies I was allowed to watch.
Oh, nice.
So it's they hold a special place in my heart. So the 2012 remake I was not looking forward to, but I picked it up at one point. I have the Blu-ray sitting on my shelf, and honestly, I was pleasantly surprised when I watched it for the first time. It was actually not that bad at all.
So I feel like in 2012, and I'm gonna say this without any substantiation with evidence, I feel like we were in a bit of a remake, reboot, reimagining bonanza around this time, especially with a lot of the old Arnold movies. This Total Recall was definitely met with some trepidation before release. And I think for me, I mean, I'm gonna go out to the theater to see just about anything, especially something like this. Total Recall, absolutely loved it growing up. Like, I can't imagine, life without it at that time, right? Same thing with RoboCop, as you said. These were like formative movies in my action sci-fi genre. These were formative movies for me in the action sci-fi genre. I do remember walking out of Total Recall in the theater, like this remake here, and not being super disappointed with it. I don't know if it was just trying to avoid a lot of the negativity that, it was probably receiving at the time, that I just kind of wanted to be maybe a little bit different. But I found a lot of things that I enjoyed in it. And that being said, I never really went back to it. I didn't go buy the Blu-ray right away. I watched it. I think I gave it a few stars on the ratings, and just moved on. So I was in a used movie store a number of months ago now, and I saw Total Recall, the Blu-ray, was sitting there for $1.99, and I thought, you know what? I probably should check this out again for $2. Why not, right? Saturday night comes around, I pop this in, I discover that there's a director's cut on this Blu-ray edition, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I like to look now to get the general sense to see if the director's cut is really worth it. Like, maybe this just added 2 or 3 minutes of extra special effects, probably gore, that sort of thing, right? And the initial reaction I was seeing online was saying, no, this director's cut adds quite a bit. I think it was about 20 minutes that are different. So the films, I don't recall exactly how long they are, but this one is about 10 minutes longer than the theatrical cut, but there's 20 minutes of different content. So they did go back and change quite a bit in the film. And unfortunately, when I'm watching the director's cut, I'm sitting there, I'm enjoying it, but I really couldn't compare it to the theatrical cut. I am not familiar enough with that original one to sort of draw any comparisons. But I was really digging this movie. There's some really good special effects going on. The action seemed pretty solid. And everyone just seemed like they were doing a decent job, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, I was pleasantly surprised by this film, considering like Len Wiseman hasn't done a whole lot outside of the Underworld series, but he did a really good job here. Like you were saying, there's some really cool action scenes. There's a couple, or there's one scene at the end, a 0G action scene. It's really good. I mean, you look at the action in this movie and compared to some of the shaky cam, quick cut stuff we have today, it's super clean and clear and easy to follow. And they do some really neat stuff. It's obviously done with CG to an extent where the camera moves around the room in really kind of in crazy ways.
Yeah.
Like that, I was thinking that first fight scene when he first goes to recall and the soldiers all bust in, and there's a crazy fight scene there.
I think you're going to enjoy the Underworld series. I know you just showed me you picked up the Blu-ray set with all 5 movies. A few of them are directed by Len Wiseman, and he has, especially I think in that second Underworld movie, this really good eye for action.
Well, he's married to Kate Beckinsale, right? Or he was, or is he still?
He might be. I don't know. I do know they had a relationship and they were married at some point. If they still are or not, I'm not sure.
I only bring it because she's in this film as well. Almost like she's a muse of sorts for him, right? So it was really neat too. So there's some aspects that I liked about this one, where Kate Beckinsale was when she was undercover as his wife, as not Dennis Quaid. As Douglas Quaid. That's Dennis Wade. That's an entirely
Douglas Quaid. Yep.
But yeah, as Dennis Quaid, that's it again. Douglas Quaid's wife. She was using an American accent, and then when she reveals herself to be the evil secret agent undercover, she switches back to her regular British accent. So it's nice little touches like that.
Interesting. I guess it might provide some help to like the major changes between this and the original Schwarzenegger Verhoeven film. This one does not take place on Mars, right? And I do remember this criticism in the theatrical release time frame, and I kind of appreciated that they weren't going to make a direct remake. Like, this is not going to be a shot-for-shot thing. The story beats are going to be a little bit different with similar characters. This one does not take place on Mars, and in this version, there are basically 2 mega cities, one in Britain and one in Australia, and they are connected through this giant tunnel that they bored through the center of the planet. And there is a gravity elevator that's, it basically, if you're leaving Australia, this gravity elevator just lets go. You fall all the way down through the earth. Gravity reverses on the other side, and then you're shot up to the other side where they arrive. So there's a definite class system commentary going on here too, where the Australian city is basically where all your blue collar workers are. This is where Colin Farrell's Douglas Quaid resides, and there is a higher class in the British area, I guess, and there's a resistance that is trying to kind of equalize these 2 class systems and trying to get better, stuff for the Australian city. I'm probably not describing it very well.
No, that's perfect. I think, also lacking from this one, in the original, it was essentially the mutants who were trying to fight for equal rights, and they were specifically mutated because they had been working in the mines and exposed to various chemicals. What I did, after you mentioned how much you really enjoyed watching this director's cut, so I literally watched 2 nights in a row. I watched the original, and then I watched the director's cut kind of back to back to get a feel for it.
Oh, really?
And both times I rated this 3.5 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd. So
That's pretty fair.
I liked both versions, and I would say that the director's cut definitely edges out the theatrical cut, but I wouldn't say it's like miles better. What it does do is it puts back some of that ambiguity that was present in the first film of whether or not Douglas Quaid really was a secret agent or whether it was just all memories implanted in his head after going to recall. If it is that, by the way, that is the only time in cinematic history where the ending of "it was all just a dream" actually worked. That's the only time. Paul Verhoeven is the only one to ever pull that off, and only because he definitively never came down on whether it was a dream or not. And this one kind of restores that with the tattoo kind of being missing on his arm at the end, the tattoo that had been the marker for putting the drugs in to get him to implant the memories, and he looked down at the end of the movie, it was gone, so they put that back in. And the other interesting thing, which you had brought up, and I was so obsessed with it, I was looking for it the whole time, was that in the director's cut, he had also gone facial reconstruction surgery. In addition to having his memory wiped, he had changed himself from Ethan Hawke into Colin Farrell. And so part of the reason they had to have alternate scenes was because he literally looked different. So members of the Resistance literally wouldn't have recognized him because he had a different face.
Like, how criminal is it that you would cut a cameo from Ethan Hawke out of your movie, right? The director's cut fixes that, puts him back in the film. Right. It's all the much better for it. And I just wanted to throw out one more scene. Recall in the Verhoeven original movie where Arnold has to remove the tracking device from his head, right? And it's this really grotesque scene where he sticks this thing up his nose, pulls this giant glowing red bulb out. You know, it's very unsettling, but it was fantastic. In this one, they go full body horror. And this one stuck with me, honestly. In this future, cell phones are embedded in the palm
only
of
for
your
the
head.
secret agent.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe it was just like a class
I'm watching
thing.
it again. After he pulled it out, he sold it to the guy because they'd never seen it before, and only Kate Beckinsale and Colin Farrell, the only ones who have that phone, and they're super secret agents.
Okay, I thought it was just a class thing because he pulls it out and sells it to the guy because they've never seen it before, thinking, well, down here at the bottom of the barrel, they wouldn't have that kind of technology. But regardless, he has to pull this thing out of his hand, right? And this thing stayed with me for a while. Just the effect on it was brilliant. It was really disgusting. I loved every second.
No, it was really cool. There was some really good parts in it, but it's a really fun ride. Doesn't quite match the highs of the original, but it's definitely I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this as a fan of the original, and I'm proud to display these side by side on my shelf.
So I think you gave this movie, the theatrical and director's cut, 3.5 stars. I checked my Letterboxd, and I had rated the theatrical cut 3.5 stars back in 2012 when I saw it, and I would rate this one 4 stars.
4 stars, wow.
Yeah, well, I might catch some flack for that, but just to be fair, Verhoeven, Schwarzenegger, Total Recall is at a 5-star plus for me.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I can let that slide.
Yeah. So, let's hear the next movie you've seen recently. What stood out to you?
Okay, I think after our discussion on Willy's Wonderland, which is episode 6?
Yes.
Which you can check out on whatever platform you choose to listen to podcasts on. Available now. We talked about his filmography, specifically one film, Wicker Man, which I was waiting to hold off on until I saw the original from 1973. And so as a little homework assignment to myself, not a homework assignment because that makes it sound like work, but this is fun. I love watching movies. It's a hobby. So I checked out, again, 2 nights in a row. I watched the original Wicker Man, and then I watched I don't want to say Nicolas Cage reboot, but it's known because of Nicolas Cage, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a remake starring Nicolas Cage, basically.
Yeah. Right? And just to compare and contrast, so I had both of them fresh in my mind. So the original Wicker Man, 1973, directed by Robin Hardy, starring, I don't want to be mean, but probably a bunch of people that no one's going to know. Edward Woodward, Oh no!
I mean, Christopher Lee was in
yes.
there, and you're gonna know him.
I stand corrected. Christopher Lee was Lord Summerisle, and as usual, he was a delight to watch on screen. It was weird because I've seen him so often as a very old man in movies, right? Like in Lord of the Rings and as Count Dooku in the Star Wars prequels. So it was really kind of weird seeing him as a youngish man in this. Like I almost didn't recognize him at first, but he did a really good job. He was really creepy. For those of you who don't know, the basic plot of The Wicker Man is essentially there's this isolated community where a police officer is lured in, as it turns out, to investigate the disappearance of a young girl. And it turns out that he's lured in to be the human sacrifice in some pagan rituals to their sun god, I believe it is, including being burned alive in a giant wicker man, which is
a literal giant.
Yeah, literally this giant kind of effigy of a male figure made out of wicker, so it burns quicker. I'm like Pee Wee Herman. I'm a poet and I don't know it.
I can't even at this point.
But yeah, but the 1973 Wicker Man, it's hailed as one of the great kind of classic horror films, and for good reason, right? It was a very, very slow burn, very creepy movie.
That Wicker Man did not slowly burn though at the end.
It was it was not slow. There was definitely some accelerant on there, but I wasn't blown away by it. It wasn't for me like at Exorcist or Poltergeist levels or the level of Texas Chainsaw Massacre in terms of that kind of classic, but it was a solid flick, right? It was enjoyable.
Like there was quite a bit of time where he's just investigating what was it, a disappearance of a girl, a missing girl.
A young girl.
And he's basically just going around talking to people, and people are being kind of weird with him. And he's just like, it's that isolation. This town is isolated, but he is super isolated there because no one really wants to talk to him.
And one of the things I found tough getting into the 1973 Wicker Man was that the protagonist, this police officer, he was so unlikable that it was really hard to identify with him.
Like, he wasn't coming over there and being charismatic. He wasn't trying to win these people's hearts, right? Like, he came over for business, and he was not screwing around.
He came over for business, but just the way he was going about it, he was rubbing people the wrong way and being very blunt and obvious. He was not, I'll put it this way, he would never have made it as an undercover cop.
Yeah. And Christopher Lee is kind of like the leader of this community.
/cult, yeah. So I think the story in the original is that generations ago, his grandfather, I think it was, or great-grandfather, kind of was essentially, he was the richest guy there, kind of led this community there, and used these pagan rituals basically as a tool to help control the people that were living under him, but also to help kind of direct their energies when things went wrong. Like, for example, if they had a bad year at the harvest. Through the generations, his family kept using these pagan rituals essentially as a means to maintain kind of control and maintain order within this isolated community. So it was kind of interesting that there was almost a bit of cynicism in Lord Summerisle's approach to the whole religious component, where he was aware that he was using this religion for controlling people, right? There was this kind of ambiguity as to whether or not he actually believed this stuff, right?
I don't know if you're finished talking about the 73 version, but how does that compare to the reboot from 2006?
Okay, so I gave the original 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was good.
That's solid. That's pretty respectable, yeah.
And I gave the Nicolas Cage version, the 2006 remake, 1 out of 5 stars.
You know what? We're almost on point. I gave the original Wicker Man 3 stars, and the remake 1 star as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, I think I gave it the 1 star just because of the production value alone. And like the acting,
like the production value was decent, is what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially. Like the updated script was definitely not an improvement. They moved it from England to America in terms of the setting, which so right away you're kind of losing some of that kind of old world mystery, right? Historically, it felt more appropriate for this cult to exist in England, whereas like you had that centuries of isolation as opposed to America, which is a much younger country by comparison.
That's
right. It didn't feel the same, and then it just didn't have as deft a touch in terms of storytelling. This was directed by Neil LaBute.
Yeah.
But again, also did want to point out also this is why, because of the acting too. There was Ellen Burstyn as Sister Summersisle. So
that's basically the equivalent of Christopher Lee's character?
Yeah, Ellen Burstyn as Sister Summersisle. So it was changed up a bit because the original movie was all about these pagan rituals were very sexualized, and they were very much had a bunch of, as the characters themselves pointed out, phallic symbol, but there was like that fertility rituals mixed with the harvest rituals, which makes sense if you look at historically how these kind of human and seasonal cycles were tied together in terms of rituals. So you look at the changing of the seasons, birth and rebirth, and you look at fertility rituals as well as harvest rituals, and they kind of tie in together, so it makes a certain kind of sense. And then in the remake, the cult, I don't know, they didn't get too far into it, but it was all about, essentially it was a woman-led cult. It was a matriarchy.
Oh, yes.
So they changed it up a bit. So the men essentially were second-class citizens.
And they're not allowed to talk on the island.
Yeah, the men weren't allowed to talk, and all the women were called...
Which would immediately put Nicolas Cage's detective at odds with it, right? Like, as an outsider in that area.
Well, it would put Nicolas Cage at odds, for sure.
And, of course, you encountered the infamous bee scene, right? I feel like the Wicker Man remake here, like a lot of people probably haven't seen the original one or forgotten it from back in the 70s, but the Wicker Man was put on the radar of our now modern meme culture with the bees. And I don't know if you want to describe what happened there, like the scene that plays out.
So it's established early on in the movie that Nicolas Cage's detective character is allergic to bees. And then there's a scene later on in the movie where he ends up in this field where so on this island in the remake, they're beekeepers. So one of their prime exports is honey. And he finds himself attacked by bees, and he's saved by the weird cult people. But then at the end, when they're getting ready to sacrifice him, they break both of his legs.
Oh.
Yeah, they
forgot about that.
They put his legs up against this log, break both of his kneecaps, Misery style. And then they put this helmet on him, and they dump in a bunch of CGI bees that attack him. And Nicolas Cage famously screams, "Not the bees! Not the bees!" But it's not just his delivery, it's the whole scenario, I think, is just kind of over the top and ridiculous, and not in like a good way. It's kind of, it's just...
Like, it's kind of a poor payoff. I mean, you spend the movie allergic to bees, and you think, okay, this is going to come into play later on, and it's literally just pour a bunch of bees onto his head. Like, the outcome is going to be the same regardless.
He doesn't even die from it, right? I mean, even somebody who's not allergic to bees, if you get stung that many times, you're likely to die, even with he has like his little bee EpiPen, which is treated like a magic cure for bee stings. But it's like, that's if you have a bee sting. If you have like 3,000 bee stings, it doesn't matter how many EpiPens you get. Even a normal person is going to potentially die from that.
It just seemed like it was a poor attempt to try and layer something on for that character. I mean, the outcome of him being inserted into the Wicker Man was going to be the same regardless, right?
Yeah, like it wasn't enough. They had to do the bee thing. The whole thing was just, it was a masterclass in how not to remake a classic horror film. I mean, contrast that with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, what year was that? That was early 2000s, I think, right?
I think it was 2003.
Yeah, 2003-ish, with Jessica Biel, which was actually, as a fan of the original, like that remake was really well done. It did its own thing, right? It took that original concept and it built on it, took the narrative in its own direction. No, this was not that.
So I guess we mentioned the ratings we gave these movies. Are these purchase worthy? Would you put either of these movies into your mighty movie collection?
So here's the thing. I already have the Nicolas Cage 2006 Wicker Man in my collection. It was gifted to me, and I don't get on the original 1973 version. So, and that's the funny thing, because like I would definitely buy the original version. I don't know if I would put down hard-earned cash for the Nicolas Cage remake, unless it were like $1.99 at the used movie store.
Like, it's not even good. You may as well just go on YouTube and watch the B scene on repeat a few times to get your fill of that remake movie. But I do agree, I don't own either one of these movies in my collection, and I would probably pick up the original Wicker Man if it was the right price.
Yeah, I think it's not a must-have, but it's a good one to put in the circulation for your annual kind of Halloween watching. I think maybe if you were, if you grew up with it, and maybe if I had watched it when I were younger, I would have more of an attachment to it. But watching it now, it didn't click with me a super deep way like other horror movies have. Even watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I didn't watch it until recently, but it's still, like I was still engaged by it, engrossed by it, and I could see why it was a classic. Wicker Man, I get that it's a classic, but for me, it didn't really stand out that much. But it was it was a well-made film. It was creepy, but it didn't knock my socks off either.
Yeah. So yeah, the next movie that I wanted to bring up is definitely a blind spot in my movie career. This is a movie that I probably should have watched when I was a kid. I should have watched it growing up in high school or even afterwards, but here we are 40 years later, finally sitting down to watch this film. Flash Gordon, 1980 film starring Sam J. Jones, directed by Mike Hodges. I don't know how I missed this film. And I think this had a recent 4K release by Arrow Video, which is kind of what put it back on my radar.
Yes.
I know this movie is mentioned here and there. I've seen some stills and maybe some different short video clips from it. But man, I am glad that I finally checked this film out. Again, this was a Saturday night treat for me. I went in really not knowing what the movie was about, except that it was about Flash Gordon. And quite frankly, I don't know anything about Flash Gordon. I'm just going to read the very short overview from Letterboxd here. A football player and his friends travel to the planet Mongo and find themselves fighting the tyrant, Ming the Merciless, to save Earth. And I didn't even read that before I started watching this movie, and I'm kind of confused when the movie starts off. He is a football player. I thought he was a superhero with powers and everything, but no, he's just a dude. He's just a dude with these flowing blonde locks of hair. He just woos all the women that he comes across, right? It's completely bananas. Have you seen this film?
I have to confess also that I have not yet seen this film. It's been on my list for a while. The only thing I can add to this discussion is without Flash Gordon, we wouldn't have Star Wars. Because part of the background is that George Lucas was trying to get the rights to make a Flash Gordon film.
Oh, okay.
Couldn't get it, and so that's essentially he went out to make his own space adventure movie, and that's one of the kind of catalysts that allowed him to, or forced him to go and make his own space adventure movie, which was Star Wars.
So I guess that does stand to reason. I think Flash Gordon was a newspaper comic strip for a few decades, right? I probably should have done my research beforehand, but I kind of enjoyed going into the movie knowing as little as possible and walking out with a fairly campy but really full of energy Like this film exuded an energy that was really kind of hypnotic, and I couldn't help but just enjoy it. It's a fairly decent runtime. Like it's almost in at a full 2 hours, and it's very, very fast paced on this planet where Ming the Merciless, the tyrant, basically has control over different races of people, including like these birdmen, and some other races that I can't think of offhand. But all these races are kind of subservient to him and just do his bidding. And it's not until Flash and his buddies show up that they can sort of turn the tides against the tyrant. There was a lot of interesting special effects going on, and you could see some of the budget constraints come through in those special effects. But I kind of thought, for the budget, for what I'm seeing, tongue in cheek, it was a lot of fun. It was colorful. It was completely off the rails most of the time. There's a lot of stuff that didn't make any sense. Like they go from area to area very quickly. Transportation is completely wild, but everyone just seemed like they were having a blast. And I don't know, it was just really good. There's a lot of passion that shines through on the screen. It was difficult to ignore that. And I did check out some of the special features, and this is one where, the cast is going to get back together for reunions and stuff, and you can just see, they went through this experience together, and they had fun. They're all better for it. And I think, a shame that you still haven't seen this. You should put it at the top of your priority list. Don't expect, a grand space drama or epic, but it is still a pretty fun adventure film. And I really don't have much else to say about the film. I gave it 3.5 stars, and I'm not sure why I ended up at that rating. Maybe it deserves more. Maybe it deserves less. I don't know.
So
it was good.
Is the 4K Arrow version sitting on your shelf right now?
It's not, no. But I have been tempted by it. Sometimes, like in the past few months when stores were open, I did see it sitting there, and priced at about $50 plus taxes was a little bit steep. I also own this film on Blu-ray anyways, as part of the Mondo X Steelbook series that came out ages ago. Yes. So this, I think I've had this sitting on my shelf for probably 7 or 8 years. Yeah, and I do feel bad I didn't check it out earlier. So I do technically own it. The 4K transfer and everything would probably enhance it quite a bit. But, yeah, this was a good film.
No, that's awesome. I'm putting this on my list. I will check this out ASAP.
Fantastic.
Nice. So, next film I want to talk about. So, this is going back to the halcyon days of 2004. This film sparked an entire generation of memes before people knew what memes were. And I've been on a quest to kind of share some of these movies with my kids. And so a couple weeks back, I introduced them to this classic, Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. So Napoleon Dynamite came out in 2004, which seems like much longer ago than it should.
Yeah. Oh, for
like
sure.
It feels like it just came out yesterday, but it did not. It was starring, of course, the singular John Heder as Napoleon Dynamite. I don't know anybody else who could have possibly pulled that off. Like, it's one of those roles that's just so iconic. You can't imagine anybody else doing this. Directed by Jared Hess. Also, I have to mention, because my kids told me this, they said it was hands down the best opening credits scene they'd ever seen in a movie.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you recall it at all, but what happens is it's almost like a cafeteria style where everybody's name is kind of written in condiments on different pieces of food, or sometimes it's on like the wrapper of different pieces of food, but it's all kind of food related. It's really, really unique, really cool. But yeah, Napoleon Dynamite is one that it was a film that dominated the kind of cultural consciousness at the time. It was just kind of everywhere, and it's a really wholesome kind of film, right? There's no violence or nudity or foul language. it's just these quirky characters doing quirky things, and it's really kind of almost like slice of life, or kind of episodic more than one singular narrative almost.
Yeah, there's almost like a certain kind of innocence to all the characters and in their sincerity. Like they, for lack of a better word, everyone is kind of weird in the film.
Yeah.
And they talk to each other in a fairly frank way, but it's very endearing.
Yeah, I'd say quirky, and I think...
Quirky, yes.
Yeah, I think the word you used, sincere, really captures it. It's sincere in a way that very few movies are these days, or even maybe that very few movies can be these days. There's almost a certain kind of, not naivete, but there's that sincerity and earnestness that's really hard to recapture, like in this kind of, especially now living in COVID-19 times. But I think it just feels like cinema and culture is in a lot more cynical place right now, where Napoleon Dynamite feels really out of place, I guess.
And there's some good relationships in this film. Like, is it kind of, what is the film about? Like, what is the overall plot of this film?
I mean, really the core of the film. So there's a couple kind of intertwining subplots. The main one is Napoleon Dynamite befriends a new kid at his school. So he's a high school student. A new kid comes named Pedro, and Pedro ends up running for class president against a really popular girl. And then there's another subplot where Napoleon and his brother live with their, I believe it's their aunt, and she ends up, I think she said she originally was because she was injured, so she goes away to kind of a quote unquote retreat, but it's really her like with a bunch of friends on dune buggies in the desert, just having a good time. And so his uncle kind of moves in with them and kind of bullies him around. And then there's another kind of subplot with Napoleon and this girl, and they kind of are becoming, they don't quite become, I guess, boyfriend and girlfriend, but they kind of form this kind of sweet, very kind of sweet, innocent, sincere kind of friendship between these two kind of outcast characters. So there's a couple things going on, and then his Napoleon Dynamite's brother keeps talking about this girl that he's dating in this online chat room, and at first you think it's like, oh well, this is just, he's just making up this girlfriend to make himself, seem better than he is, or it's not seem better than he is, but to kind of give himself some meaning or some sense of importance that he doesn't have. But then it turns out that she is real, and she comes and visits, and he goes and kind of runs off with her at the end, finding his own kind of happiness. But eventually, Napoleon, through the power of interpretive dance, puts on his performance that wows the crowd at the presidential debates, or the student presidential debates, and eventually helps his friend, who's kind of an outcast like him. Essentially, he wins the presidency. But it's really kind of, I'm not really capturing the spirit of the film by just describing the plot. It's not really plot driven.
Yeah, no, I could understand it. It's kind of difficult. Like I think you said it before, it's kind of a slice of life film. It's more of a look at these characters, like, let's see what these characters are up to. Let's watch their interactions. The interpretive dance scene at the end was really fantastic, and I feel like even today you would still see the famous "Vote for Pedro" T-shirt that Napoleon wears for much of the movie, right?
The next time I see that come up somewhere, I gotta buy one. I really wish I'd bought one of those back in the day.
There was something about a Ligar in this movie, if I recall correctly.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if it's the girl that he's sort of developing a relationship with.
It's a liger. It's a cross between a lion and a tiger. It's only my most favorite animal. Just like his. Like I remember for a while there, back in 2004, 2005, everyone had like a Napoleon Dynamite impression.
And I think it was kind of nice seeing a bit of a high school film where it wasn't just about lusting after female classmates, right? Like it was just, it sort of took a different approach. It sort of focused on the more meek and quirky ones that would probably get overshadowed or just made fun of in your typical high school, sex romp comedy film.
Yeah, it was very, very earnest, very sincere, but kept talking about Napoleon had all these skills, right? He kept talking about he's got do you got any skills? Like nunchuck skills, bow staff skills, hacking skills. What are you going to do today, Napoleon? It's the first lines of the film, right? What are you going to do today, Napoleon? Whatever I feel like. Gosh.
You know what? I'm going to have to rewatch this film now. I don't have, I haven't marked as watched in Letterboxd. I don't have a rating on it, though. What would you put the film at?
Ooh, good question, Brian. So I have this currently at 4.5 out of 5 stars, but also I have the heart indicating that I liked it.
That's a huge bonus on top of an episode. That's the intangible outside the scale, which we haven't talked about before in these episodes, is the heart.
Yeah. Talking about, for those of you who don't follow along, this is the Letterboxd rating system where you can go to the 5 stars, but there's also an option to like the film in addition to those 5 stars, which gives it, so you can have up to 5 stars plus a heart.
Yeah.
But yeah, Napoleon Dynamite, for me, it definitely holds up. I was really surprised. I was laughing the whole time watching this again.
And your kids loved it.
My kids loved it. They were quoting this thing for the next week.
That's fantastic. I mean, hopefully with that, they can talk to their friends and get a whole other generation of eyeballs on this film. Give it some more life.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. I'm trying to go through. I actually watched Dodgeball with the kids. Oh, very, nice. Very different experience, a little different end of the spectrum. But again, they're at the age now, maybe they're a little young for Dodgeball. I may. So some of these things I'm introducing a little bit younger age than I probably would have been allowed to. But I think my kids are at that level where they're okay with this. Where Dodgeball is a fun movie to watch, but there's nothing really kind of deeper or meaningful to latch onto, whereas Napoleon Dynamite, it has that earnestness, but I think it also has this positive message, right, where you're saying you don't have to be an athlete, an all-star athlete with the chiseled jaw or the perfect body, whatever that means, to find meaning with your life and to make connections with other people, that you can be who you are, however quirky and however outside the box that person is, and you have permission to be different, and everyone still has meaning and value to their life, right? So there is, despite it being just this quirky comedy, there are some kind of deeper positive messages here.
That's really fantastic. All right, should we move on to the next film here?
Yeah, move on.
All right.
Oh gosh, yeah, let's do another film. Ugh.
I think you've nailed that impression perfectly. That's fantastic.
Spent way too much time practicing this.
Well, let's see how your Keanu Reeves impressions do, because I watched a real banger of a film recently. This is a film that I grew up on. Now, to give you some context, I loved sci-fi when I was young. I rented every sci-fi movie I could get my hands on. And Johnny Mnemonic from 1995 was definitely a standout for me. This movie blew my mind. I loved it. It's maybe one of the earlier cyberpunk films that I'd seen. So
I think it was in university. I think you forced us to watch this movie.
It's very, very likely, yeah. I loved every minute of this movie back then. We obviously watched it in university days, and I think I've kind of neglected it over the years. I thought it was time to revisit it. So Johnny Mnemonic, 1995, directed by Robert Longo, who, according to Letterboxd, has not directed anything else. But yeah, stars Keanu Reeves. And this was really shortly after he did Speed. So he was really coming into the limelight as a big star here, and steps into one of his early sci-fi roles that I think really gave rise to the likes of The Matrix. short 4 years later. So other notable stars in this movie, Dina Meyer, who was in Starship Troopers a couple years later, and a whole host of other movies.
I remember Dina Meyer.
Yeah, no, she's always fantastic. I think she kind of got, well, I don't want to say she got stuck in the Saw movies, but she was in quite a few of the Saw movies as well. But yeah, she appeared in a couple Starship Troopers movies, which I did rewatch last year, and I took in all the sequels. There's 5 Starship Troopers movies, 3 live action ones, and she's in the 3rd one, I believe, reprising her role.
And
there.
Just to be clear, for those listening at home, you watched all those sequels of your own free will.
And I loved every second of it. Yeah.
Who hurt you, Brian? Who hurt you?
So it felt really relevant to watch Johnny Mnemonic right now because this movie takes place in the futuristic year of 2021.
No way.
A dystopian 2021 where cybernetic enhancements are commonplace, where mnemonics. So Johnny is a mnemonic carrier. He has a hard drive in his brain. It's like a wet drive where I guess you just plug in. He holds 80 gigabytes of data in his brain, right? And for 1995, that was impressive, but like it wasn't far out of the realm of possibility.
But back then,
we knew drives were getting to be like a gigabyte big, right? So 80 gigabytes kind of made sense in 30 years' time.
Yeah, like in 1995 was saying 80 gigabytes the same as saying a bajillion gazillion gigabytes, essentially?
I mean, I was a little bit spoiled when I was a kid because my dad had a work at home set up and he got to play with a lot of new tech. So I remember in probably 96, 97, having a multi-gigabyte hard drive in our computer at home. Yeah, so, I mean, it wasn't entirely unrealistic that we could see an 80 gigabyte drive implanted into someone's body, in 30 years. But basically, a mnemonic essentially carries data kind of like a snail mail system here because he's carrying this data for other people. The internet is a virtual appliance now that is poisoning the minds of the population. I believe they call it NATS, N-A-T-S, and that is, sorry, they call it NAS, N-A-S, and that stands for Nerve Attenuation Syndrome. So this data has to be carried securely, and I guess they didn't have encryption quite figured out in the future of 2021. So you basically just download the data into his brain, and he just drives cross country, flies around the world, plugs into the other terminal, and they download the data, right? The opening scene of this movie is fantastic because he's going into a hotel room where he's supposed to be picking up this data for these guys. He in the elevator ride up to the hotel room, he doubles the space in his brain, his brain memory, from 80 gigabytes to 160 gigabytes, which was that much more significant. Doubling space back then was something we commonly did in Microsoft DOS days to get more space for our games. We might double our drive from 200 megabytes to 400 megabytes, but at the risk of drive instability. So this made sense at the time when I'm watching it that he would do that and have an unstable memory in his brain. When he gets into the hotel room, they need to download 320 gigabytes into his brain, which was much higher than advertised. And Keanu, in his steely reserve, doesn't blink an eye. He's like, I can handle it. And of course, he can't handle it. Essentially what happens is he gets this data transferred into him. It's very sensitive information. People come in, assassins are trying to kill these guys who created the data. They know it's with him, so now it's kind of a chase movie where he has to work his way over to a futuristic Los Angeles, I believe, and unload this data, not only because it's important, sensitive data, but because if he holds it for more than 24 or 48 hours, I think his head just might just start leaking out of his ears or something. I don't know. It's not good for him.
Yeah, was the data itself sensitive?
It was really important data. It was, spoiler alert, the cure for nerve attenuation syndrome. So everyone is on the internet, but everyone is suffering from the symptoms of this syndrome, and this data is the cure to that. So essentially, I don't know what company is after it. You could just say it's like a pharmaceutical company is maybe after them because they want to maximize profits on the cure, control the population through the syndrome, right? And control the population through the internet.
So you're saying that this 1995 film portrayed a dystopic 2021 in the middle of a global pandemic?
Yeah, that's it exactly. Yeah. This movie was kind of rough to watch at this point in time. I could definitely see being a 14-year-old kid and absolutely loving this film. Today, I mean, it's not really greatly acted. The story is serviceable. The effects are whatever.
What are you talking about? Just because there's an intelligent dolphin running the resistance?
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. There's a resistance that, is going against these mega corporations, I guess.
As there are.
And it's led by a super intelligent dolphin.
As they are.
As they are. I mean, we know dolphins are intelligent. In the future, they got cybernetic enhancements. So, man, you got to look out for these things.
Why not? Yeah, I don't think I can enjoy Johnny Mnemonic on a literal level anymore. Like, I enjoy it ironically, because it's fun to watch, but as you said, the plot is so ridiculous. The special effects, I think the special effects when they go into the quote unquote internet don't hold up super well.
It is definitely early level, like VR graphics. Like it's a step above Lawnmower Man, if anyone's familiar with the special effects from that. But, the concept is fun, right?
I do remember one thing that was super cool. There's a super cool kind of movie weapon where the one bad guy has this, like, red string of plasma or something that he uses like a whip that can essentially... Yes. It's almost like a whip lightsaber that he uses.
That's right. It literally cuts through everything, and he's just whipping it around, and it's a pretty potent, dangerous tool, really.
Yeah, or that was a really kind of neat... That's the thing, there's like little flashes of neat ideas like that throughout the movie. Even just the whole idea of, plugging a bunch of data into somebody's head and having them be a character. That's just, that's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And at this point, I would love to see a remake of Johnny Mnemonic, starring Keanu Reeves still. I mean, he's grown as an actor since these days, and I think with a modern touch, this could be a really fun world that they're in. I mean,
Well, I think, Brian, you just came up with the plot of John Wick Part 4.
I mean, that could very well be it. And there's, I just want to shout out to one other character in the movie. Dolph Lundgren plays the street preacher, who is essentially kind of a Terminator character where I think he's just sort of a gun for hire, but he has so many cybernetic enhancements that he's practically bulletproof. They set him loose and there's no stopping him, right? That was fun. Ice-T is in the movie as well. Henry Rollins shows up.
Oh, nice.
There's a lot of familiar faces here. There's a lot of stuff going on. The sets and everything really... I think that's where the budget really fails them. Everything is cast in blue shadows. It's not very interesting visually seeing this futuristic LA. It just kind of looks like they just tossed some plastic bags into an alleyway, colored the whole thing blue and black, and just call it a day right there, right? But love the concept. Fun movie. I loved it more when I was younger, and at this point it would land... I gave it 2 stars. And I'm feeling pretty confident with that rating. It probably shouldn't even have that many stars, but I can't deny that nostalgia factor.
Would you buy it?
Yes.
Are you staring at it on your shelf right now?
I wish I was. I really do. I feel like this would be a perfect $5 to $10 Blu-ray pickup. It's not one I've ever gone looking out for. I don't add it to any of my little wish lists or price alerts, so maybe down the road... I'll do that, and maybe one of these boutique labels will indulge us and remaster this film, give it a proper release, or maybe there is already one out there. I just need to do my own research there.
Yeah, it just reminded me, I wanted to give a shout out to another film that was released in 1995, called Strange Days.
Oh my god.
Which was directed by Catherine Bigelow. But this is only because there's a passing similarity in the concept of, in Strange Days, you can record people's memories, and then you can watch other people's memories being played back. So it's kind of, Strange Days is kind of similar in kind of that cyberpunk-ishness in terms of its setting and its technology, but just much better script, much better plot, much better story, much better direction. So yeah, go out and watch Johnny Mnemonic for sure, for fun, and then when you want to get serious, you go watch Strange Days.
Yeah, definitely one of the most memorable films in that cyberpunk sci-fi genre. Strange Days, fantastic. And I actually just bought that movie on VHS because I realized I didn't have it on any format. And I've been trying to get into some of these old movies I enjoyed, but in the formats that I originally saw them in. So I picked up a widescreen VHS copy of Strange Days.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think that's one of the easiest ways to get it, unfortunately. I believe it's out of print on DVD, and I don't think there's a Blu-ray release. I could be wrong on that, but I seem to recall it being very difficult to find. I picked up a used DVD copy at a local store at one point. I'll have to double check on that.
So yeah, if you find it out there in the wild, you best pick it up.
Or Brian's coming for you.
What's next on your recent?
Okay, I got a bunch of stuff, but I'll go a little bit newer. I did wind up checking out The Sound of Metal.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Which says it was released in 2019. But it was but it was also in the latest round of Oscars, I think, which happened just last week or the week before. So it may have been released in the US in 2020, maybe.
Yeah, it is probably one of those weird things where it saw like a festival release in 2019.
Yeah.
But really came out in a more wide release in 2020 in the US.
Yeah.
Especially just to be considered for the Academy Awards, which it has a Best Picture nomination.
Yeah. And so that was released in 2019/2020, directed by Darius Marder, starring Riz Ahmed, who you probably recognize from lots of stuff. Like, he was in Nightcrawler, he was in Rogue One, he was in Venom as the villain. He was, along with Tom Hardy, one of the best parts of that movie. But yeah, so he really is, because he's kind of the focal point of this movie. So that centers around essentially, so Riz Ahmed plays this drummer in this heavy metal band who starts to lose his hearing and eventually ends up going deaf. And so it's him, it's a very kind of, it has a very kind of like, it's a bigger, I don't know if it's a bigger budget film. It has a very kind of art house feel where it's essentially about this person's inner struggle dealing with these changes in his life. And really one of the main things about this movie that was really, really phenomenal was just the sound mixing and the sound editing and how they used sound to help tell the story of when he's starting to lose his hearing. The sound is kind of essentially mimicking kind of what he's hearing in terms of his limited hearing capacity. And then when he goes eventually, spoiler alert, I guess,
yes,
when he goes to get cochlear implants and he's hearing again for the first time after several months, and you're kind of hearing along with him, kind of hearing what he's hearing as they're adjusting the levels and things like that. But yeah, it was really well done. I can see why it was up for. I can see why it was nominated for. It was nominated for several Oscars, I believe.
Yes,
or several awards.
I think it won the Oscars for sound editing and whatnot because it really was outstanding in this film.
Yeah, so it's a personal story. So there's a large chunk of the film where he goes to specifically like a rehab facility specifically for deaf people. So it's helping people deal with their addiction issues and also helping them cope with for him specifically with having to go from hearing to not hearing and going through that adjustment, and him kind of finding himself and learning about himself, but then still kind of struggling to adapt and not really integrating with the community and wanting desperately to go back to his own life, or not his own life, desperately wanting to go back to his old life of being a drummer in a heavy metal band, and kind of figuring out really not just what he wants to do with his life, but really who he is, right? So he's kind of defining and then redefining his identity.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said there. Him and his girlfriend are traveling musicians, right? And he's a heavy metal drummer. I can't remember if you mentioned that.
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Thanks for listening, Brian.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for joining us.
So basically, when he goes deaf, he holds on to all of his musical instruments and his equipment, and him and his girlfriend own like this Winnebago for traveling in for their band together. And his whole plan afterwards is to sell all this material, which is extraordinarily difficult, as a way of putting like a realization of putting that old life kind of behind him, right? And selling this stuff so that he can hear again. That's his sole drive, is that to get these cochlear implants so that he can hear again. And it's kind of heartbreaking, since we're going full spoilers here, where he develops this really nice relationship in this rehab center, but it's also a community for deaf people and especially children, because he's inserted into children's classes on learning sign language and learning different tools of navigating their lives, right? And navigating the world without hearing. So you see him throughout the film develop relationships with these kids, but also some of his peers and the individual who's running this community. And so it feels like a betrayal when he basically drops it all to go get these implants, right? But it's that goal that he has to find. This is his journey, is to get that and experience what life will be like with those implants and hearing the world afterwards, right? And it's basically not what he thought it was going to be.
Well, I think there's some parallels made with he's addicted to, I think specifically, I think they mentioned like heroin, cocaine. I think he's done all kinds of things within the context of the movie. But I think they make some parallels between his addiction to drugs and illicit substances and his addiction to his old life, where there's a whole section where he had all his audio and recording equipment and his drum equipment still and the Winnebago, and he sells it all off in the desperate attempt to raise money for the cochlear implants, in a desperate hope that he can get his old life back. And as mentor who runs the rehab facility aptly points out, selling off all of his possessions in this way has more than a few similarities with the behavior of an addict. So it was really interesting, kind of breaking that down and kind of really exploring in a very honest, straight, very revealing way, just about the deaf community and about some of those values and about how people get along and those strategies that he learns, right? And those connections that he makes. It's a really deep and profound journey.
It was really fantastic. Definitely worth your time.
Absolutely. Check this film out. And if you do get a chance, put down some hard-earned cash for this. These filmmakers deserve it.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, go buy this movie. We want to see more movies like this.
Without a doubt. What is your rating of Sound of Metal?
So I gave it a 4 out of 5 rating. It would have been a little bit higher, but a little bit of the story felt kind of truncated. At one point, there's a transition between, the character's life at the rehab facility, and he kind of gets booted out for breaking the rules, and then he goes to France to find his girlfriend and try and rekindle that relationship again. And it just feels like it's almost like, oh, we're running out of time. We need to cut some stuff out of the middle of the movie. Let's just chop out a bunch of stuff here. It felt like there was something, a little bit of connective tissue missing, or a little bit more of the journey missing. So, but overall, great flick. Highly recommend it.
I put it at 4.5 stars for that.
Nice.
It was just a really great film to watch and listen to.
Yeah.
And experience.
It was also great how they used silence in the movie. The only other recent example I can think of where they used silence effectively was in the movie Silence by Martin Scorsese.
Okay.
Where it was just like, there's incredibly powerful moments in The Sound of Metal or in Silence, where there's like, it's just completely silent, but it's aligned so well, and it's helping to tell that story, right? And just that you don't need, a blaring soundtrack the whole time in the background. You can just have these quiet moments with these characters and allow those characters and that story to breathe a little bit. And just Sound of Metal is such a great example of, using every element of the medium to help tell that story. In this case, the sound editing and the sound mixing was so integral to help tell that story. And it blew me away.
Yeah. Fantastic. I guess keeping on with the Oscar nominated Best Picture films, I ended up watching The Father a couple nights ago, starring Anthony Hopkins and Olivia Colman, directed by Florian Zeller. This is a film about a man who basically is suffering through the symptoms and issues relating around old age, dementia, memory loss, and basically losing control of his mind and his grasp on reality. It's a fairly heavy subject matter that's talking to a few people who are a little hesitant to get into the film, probably because of its subject matter, but Anthony Hopkins just recently won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his role, and I gotta say, he absolutely knocks it out of the park in this. I always give people the context. I don't really recognize, I don't know when I'm seeing good acting or bad acting, unless it's really bad or it's really good. And this is one of those rare cases where I'm watching it. This movie is 97 minutes long. I'm watching it for 97 minutes. I am hooked for every second this guy is on screen, just acting. It's really fantastic. He does a really fantastic job. The movie is really fantastic. Obviously, the subject matter, I had basically 2 grandparents suffer through dementia and memory loss and go through a similar situation as this man here. I was younger when it was happening, but I was probably about 19 and in my early 20s, where I don't think, even though you think you're on top of the world during that time, you know everything. I know now, looking back, I don't think I had a good grasp on what was really happening with my grandparents during that time. I don't think I really appreciated the effects of losing your memory and losing that grasp on reality is. I can't imagine the toll it took on my own parents. Yeah. In this movie, seeing Anthony Hopkins' daughter suffer through this with him and feeling that frustration, where in the movie it's kind of scene to scene, but in reality here, as it's depicted in the movie, is, and you might have a conversation for 10 minutes and this guy's mood is going to change drastically, and he becomes very confused, and depending on his personality, he's going to lash out or he's just going to become joyful and playful. It's it's just really something else. Now I feel like I probably have a stronger grasp on the damage and significance of this disease, and how it affects everyone, not only the person suffering from it, but their family as well. What a movie. It was just, there was a certain energy to it where it felt like it was very fast paced. Like it is built to be confusing as well, to help convey to the viewer some of these effects where you're seeing things. This is,
Right.
This is the unreliable narrator, right? Everything is from this man's perspective, and we've already established that his perspective is not proper. His view on time is different. Scenes jump between hours to months to weeks. I think the story is told out of order as well. Everything about it is designed to kind of get you in this mindset of being confused. So when you're watching, you kind of have to let go a little bit. And it feels very quick because, it's based on a play, right? Did I mention that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's based on a play by the same director. It's the director's own play. So it has sort of that mentality. It has that feeling where it's all in one place, but the sets are slowly changing. Things are a little bit different, and you'll notice it subtly, and it kind of plays with you over time, right? It's interesting. I think in the trivia there that it said the director Florian Zeller basically wrote this for Anthony Hopkins. He said he was not going to create an English version of this movie without Anthony Hopkins. If Hopkins dropped out of the movie for whatever reason, he would go to a much simpler adaptation of his own play and do it in French, in his native language. So seeing that him basically fit the role perfectly was I don't know, really quite the treat. Just a really good film.
So, what's your rating, and would you recommend people pick this movie up, either through streaming or on physical media?
Yeah, so this was an easy 4.5 stars, and I'm not sure why I didn't give it 5 stars. Maybe it's just a misclick of my mouse when I was rating it. It could go either way. Definitely recommend checking it out. I think it's on premium rentals right now because it was a theatrical release probably a little earlier this year. I know it says it's a 2020 film, but I think it had a limited release there and probably a slightly more wider release in 2021. It should be a movie that we buy and support. You want to see more of this stuff. You want to see more of this acting. You want to see more of this directing. You want to see more stories like this. It was a pretty emotional film, and I think it'll be difficult to rewatch it, but I hope to check it out again.
No, that sounds great. I'm going to put it on my list right now.
Yeah, so you have time for one more film that we can talk about?
I could do one more film. Yeah, so in honor of an upcoming release that I'm really looking forward to, one of my current favorite movie series, fun action blockbusters. I know, Brian, you've got your Mission Impossible. I've got my Fast and Furious.
Oh, fantastic.
So I finally sat down and watched Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw, the first spin-off film from the Fast and the Furious movie series. So this movie came out in 2019. For whatever reason, I don't know why it took me so long to watch this. I know I got this as a gift on 4K at Christmas, and then I was just waiting. Yes, because my wife and I, we don't always or even often agree on what to watch and what movies to watch. But one thing we always agree on is the Fast and the Furious. For whatever reason, I don't know why or how, but I'll take it. So I was waiting for a time when my wife and I were both not tired after work. I could both, and nobody was inebriated, and we could just sit down and watch this movie in glorious 4K. So yeah, Fast and Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw, directed by David Leitch, starring everyone's favorite, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Luke Hobbs, Jason Statham as Deckard Shaw, Idris Elba as the villain Brixton, and Vanessa Kirby as Hattie Shaw, Deckard Shaw's estranged sister who comes back. Oddly enough, they never mention his other brother who was the villain in one of the other movies, Owen Shaw.
No.
Who was played by Gaston.
Did he not make it at the end of his movie or something? Like, is he...
He came back.
Is he still around?
He came back in Fate of the Furious.
Man, I really need to catch up on my Fast and Furious. I know I've seen all of them. I love watching these, but I'll defer all expert knowledge to you on this. I don't want to call it a complex world, but maybe it is a complex world of characters.
Luke Evans. That's who it is. Luke Evans plays Owen Shaw, Deckard Shaw's younger brother. But he's not only does he not appear in this movie, he's not even mentioned.
That's seems a little disrespectful.
Helen Mirren comes in as Deckard Shaw's mother.
Oh, that's right, eh?
But yeah, it's very strange. But anyway, so this is kind of this is a spin-off from the main series. So Hobbs and Shaw are characters from the Fast and the Furious. Luke Hobbs is he's an agent, I believe, with the FBI or it doesn't really matter. He's with law enforcement, and Deckard Shaw is a hardened criminal. And I believe in Fate of the Furious, they had a couple scenes together, and there's an obvious chemistry between Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. And so I think they, based on that kind of chemistry between the actors, I think, and how well they played off each other, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, I think, has a mind for blockbuster films. And so I think it kind of evolved out of that into its own standalone movie. But essentially, it's Hobbs and Shaw have to go and save the world from this. Apparently, there's an evil organization who's trying to, I think, take everything back, take society back to kind of the Stone Age. I think it doesn't matter. The particulars don't matter. All we need to know is essentially at this point in the series. So the series has now evolved from, illegal street racing and theft of DVD players to essentially superhuman people driving impossibly fast cars who have to save the world on a, I guess, yearly basis these days.
Yeah.
So
I just have a question about the superhuman aspect here, because Idris Elba was Brixton.
Yes.
And he does in fact have like superpowers in this film.
Yeah.
Like they've injected him with something that basically is like a super soldier serum.
No. He has literal cybernetic implants.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he can run faster. He can punch harder. He's super durable. I mean, they've made it. I've been kind of joking for years about the characters in the Fast and Furious franchise being essentially kind of like low-key superheroes in terms of their physical abilities and endurance. And in this movie, they just embrace the silliness full on. And it's like, yeah, there's literal supervillains with superhuman powers now in this universe.
And this is the first time they've literally given someone like superhuman abilities.
Yeah.
Like they haven't established that as a thing in this world yet until this film. Is that right?
Correct. And I think the way they set it up, it's very like looks like a very painful process. Like Deckard Shaw has a history with Brixton, or I guess he shot him in the head a couple times. So essentially and all the cybernetic implants are very painful to put in and very expensive. So it's not an easy process. So you can't just have like an army of super soldiers out there.
Yeah, that's fair.
But so there's just everything that fans have come to expect from the Fast and Furious movies. There's, insane over the top action sequences, whether that's driving or whether you're hanging from the side of a building. There's all kinds of fighting sequences, playing to the strength of the different actors. I mean, obviously, with Dwayne Johnson, who is a very large fellow, and the character is like picking bad guys up and throwing them across the room, or knocking people out with one punch and that kind of thing. And I think they even kind of they go to great lengths, I think, to kind of differentiate the fighting styles, where Deckard Shaw is a little bit more refined. And I think when you're seeing the fights through the point of view of Brixton, he's got an actual like HUD display built into his eyes. And so it's kind of neat, because when he's fighting the two characters, like Hobbs, it comes up and it's like calculating the force that he's going to hit him with. But when he's fighting Shaw, it's calculating like the velocity and the speeds of his attacks. So it's kind of like calculating out their different strengths. It's it's kind of neat. But and then eventually, I think The Rock had a lot of influence in taking the film. I think it was in Hawaii, I think, because I believe he is of Samoan heritage himself, and so I think he used the film as a way to kind of highlight that aspect of his heritage, and to highlight that culture, which is another kind of neat aspect of the Fast and Furious films, which is, I don't know if it was intentional at the beginning, but it kind of grew. The great thing about the Fast and Furious films is that they are such a diverse cast, right? You have so many people from so many different backgrounds. It's kind of rare in big budget Hollywood movies. Unfortunately, it's a rare thing even these days.
Yeah, definitely. It's a nice diverse cast with a lot of interesting and compelling characters. They've really done an awesome job, and I know a lot of the Fast and Furious movies, there's a lot of family themes going on throughout, right? It's something that everyone can relate to, and it's a way to get attached to these characters who start out as criminals and end up becoming superheroes, fighting even more super villains, and having them turn into heroes as well. Because I think I know Deckard Shaw was a villain at some point. Does he sort of join the crew?
Yeah, so I think if you look at, a lot of people criticize this actually, but if you look at Fate of the Furious, the opening scene of that movie was specifically Dom earning the respect of this man that he was racing, who hated his guts. But at the end of that race, he was able to turn him to his side, right? So one of Dom's superpowers is that power to kind of inspire or lead other people. Yeah. So I think one of the things in Fate of the Furious, when Deckard Shaw eventually kind of joins the family and helps him out, is specifically because it's playing on that theme that through all the movies, I think, that Dom is just able to inspire that respect among people, even people who are counted among his enemies. Yeah, that he can inspire them and kind of bring them into his circle or bring them into his orbit. It's kind of a neat little theme. But yeah, the theme of family is big in the Fast and Furious franchise, and that was present here. It wasn't, I don't think, the best Fast and Furious movie, but watching this movie, I had a smile on my face the whole time through this whole thing. Like Idris Elba knocks it out of the park, as he always does. It was nice to see him playing a villain for a change. I know, like in Luther, he was kind of like a morally great character, but here he's like a straight, out and out villain, with just some like great lines where he's like, I think at one point he literally says like, "I'm Black Superman."
Yeah, no, I honestly, Idris is one of my favorite actors working today. I try and watch everything he's in, and I'm glad he's shown up in the Fast and Furious 100% universe now.
Yeah, and just like the whole ridiculous scene at the end where there's like, I think like 5 or 6 cars linked to a helicopter as they're trying to keep it from escaping. And it's like a barrel of monkeys over a cliff, except with cars and a helicopter. Completely nuts, ridiculous action, but totally in keeping with the Fast and the Furious feel of ridiculous, over-the-top action.
Like kudos to the writers for continuing to elevate how ridiculous and how open my mouth is at these action scenes. They never fail to impress me. I'm always excited to see what are they going to come up with next? And so far, I mean, is this number 10 in the Fast and Furious series? I think this came right after number 9, right, in the main series.
Well, no. So there's eight movies right now in the main series. The 9th is coming out. Fast 9 is coming out this June or July, and this is part of a spin-off series, which I believe is getting a sequel as well.
Yeah. So we're gonna have concurrent running Fast and Furious universe movies, which is something I never would have expected from that first film 20 years ago.
There's also an animated show now for the kids.
all the better.
It's great. It's a fantastic film series. It's so much fun to watch, and you can count yourself in good company because Christopher Nolan is a fan of these films as well.
Yeah. No. Well, there's fantastic endorsement right there.
I think partially because one of the main directors of this series, Justin Lin, this guy knows how to film an action scene.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he knows how to tell a good story. He knows how to film a good action scene. Like, Justin Lin, I think, is one of the best blockbuster directors working today. People think it's easy to put together a big blockbuster movie. He's like, oh yeah, put an explosion here, and put these guys punching each other here. But there's a lot. It's as Justin Lin demonstrates, as Christopher Nolan demonstrates, like, it's actually really difficult to frame action and film action really, really well.
Mm-hmm. It's wild. Wow. So what is your rating of this film?
So I gave it 3.5 out of 5.
That's solid.
Yeah, there's a bare minimum now. I have to admit, I'm a huge fan of the series, so I'm going to be biased to any Fast and Furious movie that comes out.
You probably don't have offhand like your average rating for a Fast and Furious movie. Like, how does this compare to the main series?
Well, it varies. I think the low point for me in the series was number 2, Too Fast, Too Furious. Mm-hmm. And that one, I believe, I was actually looking through this the other day. I'm actually doing a series on the Real Film Chronicles website. I'm doing reviews of all the movies leading up to the big release of Fast 9.
Loving it.
And the first movie I gave 5 out of 5. And then Too Fast, Too Furious, I gave a 3 out of 5. So I think the lowest I went in the series ever was 3 out of 5 stars. So take my opinion for what it's worth. I'm hugely biased towards this series. I don't want to call it dumb. It's not dumb, but it's just big, fun action movies. But I think what I said in the review of the first one, these are serious movies that don't take themselves seriously. Mm-hmm. Right? So there's bigger themes about family and about, loyalty and honor, but it's also a series where you can jump a Lamborghini between 2 skyscrapers and somehow or have a big, like, a 20-minute long chase on a runway between a plane and a bunch of cars, and you'd never run out of runway. It's yes, for some reason, I don't know how it gets away with it. I don't know. There's a certain charm to the series that just allows you to willingly suspend that disbelief and get lost in this world.
Well, as you said, it's extremely charming, and I'm kind of dumbfounded when people dismiss these movies. For me, this is pure cinema. Like, and I love that we can go from talking about some serious dramas and, incredible performances to also equally loving something as bombastic and big and silly and fantastic as the Fast and Furious series that really is so appealing. Like, this is what cinema was made for, is, the opportunity to see films like this on the big screen that is inclusive and full of action. It's just, these people are relatable, yet they're superheroes. Everything about this is just fantastic. There's stunts, there's action, there's music, there's everything in these movies. And I think they've really embraced it, and I'm not sure how anyone can just not appreciate what they're doing with this stuff.
Yeah, like Hobbs and Shaw, just like the rest of the Fast and Furious franchise. I mean, it's just a ton of fun to sit back and just be taken on a ride, right? It's like, I know that people jumped down Martin Scorsese's throat when he talked about the MCU films, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and superhero films being almost like amusement park rides. Mm-hmm. And people were like, oh, this old man yelling at a cloud or whatever. But it's like, what's wrong with being an amusement park ride? What's wrong with that analogy? That's
exactly.
Like, the MCU films, they're a ton of fun. It feels like an experience. It feels like a ride. Same with the Fast and the Furious movies.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm on this wild ride for 2 hours, and I love it. I love it.
Like, instead of taking your kids to the Midway or the fair in town, maybe it's raining outside, you take them to the theater, you load up on popcorn, you sit down and you watch this in 2 hours of insanity on screen. And honestly, I think these are family movies to a degree as well. Like, I think they're fairly family friendly. I don't know if you've introduced your kids to the Fast and Furious series yet, but
I am currently doing a watch through with my son, who is
Perfect.
He's 10 years old. And I feel completely comfortable sitting down and watching these movies with him.
These are great.
Yeah. Good. Oh, man, it's just good fun. You got essentially, it's one of these like who's who in Hollywood now. Like this one too, a spoiler alert, I guess, but Ryan Reynolds is now part of this Fast and Furious world. He played like this FBI agent.
I couldn't believe when he showed up. It was ridiculous.
You got everyone from Helen Mirren to Ryan Reynolds. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's great. And now in the next one, you got John Cena as the bad guy.
Well, it honestly blows my mind that, we're going into 10 movies deep in this universe over the course of 20 years. It's like, what a world we live in that, audiences are supporting this kind of thing, that we have an opportunity to continue in these cinematic universes that we love. Like, when we were growing up, we got a trilogy of movies for the most part, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones. There was a finite number of movies. Now, I mean, you could grow up with Fast and the Furious. You could grow up with Marvel movies. They just keep making these films. And I love that all the actors and the talent are continuing to support it. Like, they clearly have fun doing it. I don't think it's always about the money. These are good experiences to do. And they're something really fun to consume. I don't know.
Well, you can tell, especially somebody like Vin Diesel, who gets really passionate about these projects, right? Like, you look at the Fast and Furious franchise, or you look at the Riddick franchise, which hopefully we're going to get that fourth movie, Furia, sometime. Come on, Vin Diesel. Yeah. Make it happen. But somebody, I just want to put this out there. Two things. One thing, somebody put forward an idea for a Fast and Furious sequel, bringing in Nicolas Cage's character from Gone in 60 Seconds.
Oh my goodness. That would be fantastic.
And tying that in there. For those of you who don't know, that was an early 2000s movie about a gang of car thieves. But yeah, just to tie in that Nicolas Cage
that'd be awesome
element from before. Nicolas Cage needs to be in everything. I'm just throwing it out there. Also,
you can't go wrong.
Going back to Total Recall, Ethan Hawke, if you're listening, I just want you to know that Brian and I would never cut you from our movie.
This is true. We respect you too much for that. Oh my goodness. Well, I think that basically concludes another episode of Recent Reels number 2. I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I was really pleased with it. We had a pretty solid lineup of films here, and I'm looking forward to the next batch.
100%. Always enjoyable to catch up like this. I mean, there's just far too many films to do a full episode on every one, but it's nice to know that it's nice to get this chance to kind of just give a relatively quick kind of rundown of some of these films. So for those of you listening, stay safe out there, and keep watching movies.